Concerns about stagflation are spreading in the world economy for the first time in about 40 years. Since the 1970s, the entire world, including the United States, is exposed to the risk of stagflation, which is accompanied by a recession and inflation. The World Bank sharply downgraded its global growth forecast for this year, warning that the risk of 1970s style stagflation is high. Prices have risen due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Moreover, the growth engine has cooled down due to the prolonged Russia-Ukraine war. The World Bank downgraded its global economic growth forecast for this year from 4.1% to 2.9% in its world economic outlook. He also warned that the global economy may enter the period of prolonged weak growth and high inflation, and warning that the risk of stagflation is significant. Stagflation is a phenomenon in which prices continue to rise during a recession. Stagflation is a compound word of stagnation and inflation. This is a case where high inflation, unemployment, and economic recession occur at the same time. US GDP decreased by 1.5% in the first quarter of this year, after increasing 6.9% QoQ in the third quarter of 2021. Therefore, according to NBER's definition, growth figures for the second quarter of this year must be released to officially judge a recession. However, in light of the recently announced major economic indicators such as inflation, U.S. economists analyzed that the U.S. and the world are already facing a stagflation crisis. According to the gross national income for the first quarter of 2022, announced by the Bank of Korea, Korea's GDP growth rate in the first quarter was 0.6% compared to the previous quarter, 0.1 percentage points from the preliminary estimate announced in April. It was low. Recently, the National Statistical Office announced that the cyclical variability of the coincident composite index and the cyclical variability of the leading composite index, which show current and future economic conditions, fell by 0.3 points from the previous month, respectively, in April. Inflation continues to rise rapidly. According to the National Statistical Office, the consumer price inflation rate from the same month of the previous year was 4.1% in March and 4.8% in April, recording 4% for the second month in a row and soaring to 5.4% in May. This is the largest increase in 13 years and 9 months since August 2008. Korea is also going into stagflation. The oil shock of the 1970s was a typical period of stagflation. Among the conditions of stagflation, recession is defined by the National Bureau of Economic Research as a case in which real GDP declines, that is, negative growth, for 2 consecutive quarters. In the case of Korea, there was no negative growth until the first quarter of this year. It is difficult to see it as stagflation in the narrow sense of the US NBER's definition of recession. However, growth is slowing.